now let's dive right into our reverse warrior pose. I went to the post just to see what you all had commented on. So the Sanskrit for this is Viparita Virabhadrasana. So think of warrior legs, and we're taking this reverse. We're reaching up and back, nice side body stretch. Viparita Virabhadrasana. We had one comment come in from Eve, and I'll go through her transitions here in just a moment. I thought it'd be beneficial just to talk a little bit more about the pose. So reverse warrior is a very grounding pose. It's a very active pose. You're activating through the legs. You have a good foundation, a good structure with your legs, and then you're just doing this side arch, which can also be a balance pose for some people. So really looking at who you're teaching to will kind of depend on what kind of transitions you use for the particular pose. A reverse warrior might even be the most challenging pose in your practice. It really just depends, again, on your target audience. If you're teaching a beginners group and they're still very new to balancing poses or to standing poses in general, again, this could be your peak pose. But if you're teaching like a fast-paced vinyasa class, a class that has more tenured students who have been practicing yoga a while, this might be a pose that you even put in your sun salutations or in your main flow for your class. So again, just really go back to seeing who am I teaching to and where would this pose benefit them the most. All right, so let's dive into our transitions for this pose. Eve had posted, I'm just going to pull up hers on my phone and I'll read it to you. It says, I take reverse warrior to side angle pose, then maybe repeat these two poses 2 to 3 times with the breath, getting deeper into side angle with each flow so the hand finally rests on the mat the last time. Then transition back to a side plank. Maybe even take like tree legs, and then bring the foot forward for lizard pose. Okay, so we're going reverse warrior, side angle, side plank, then, what was that last one? Lizard pose. Okay, so here we go. Here's a demonstration of what Eve had mentioned in her post. So she said to go from reverse warrior down to a side angle. So maybe your side angle just looks like this, and then she said to take this a couple times, which I love. I call this the swim in my class. You're kind of going for a swim. And then she said eventually, your hands may come down to the earth. So each time you're just getting a little deeper into each of the pose, and then your hand comes to the earth for side angle pose. And then she said to move into side plank. So for side plank, you could take this 2 ways. It just depends on which side you want to do side plank in. Eve, you'll have to let me know if you were thinking to turn or to stay facing the same direction. So if you're here in side plank, one transition you could do, which is a little tricky, is to send your front foot to stack with your back and you stay facing forward. And then she said take tree legs and then come forward into a lizard pose. And then from there you have tons of options. Or what you could do, going back to the side plank pose, here I am, you take your top hands, bring it to the earth, and you pivot to the other side and stack your feet. So that it's a little bit more of a smoother transition. You don't have to really engage your core as much. And then maybe you take tree legs. She also mentioned that you could take, peace fingers around the big toe, and then from here, bring your foot forward back into a lizard pose. So what an awesome sequence. So let's just review to recap all of that, because I know it was kind of a lot of poses. From maybe you bring your students into a warrior 2, and then you go into reverse, come down to side angle, have them go through these 2 poses, let breath lead the way, and then maybe, the hand comes to the earth as you flow, and then maybe come all the way down to side angle. You can even hold here for a couple breaths. Top hand comes to the earth, pivot to the opposite side, stack your feet, maybe take tree legs or peace fingers to the toe. And you can even go from here to bring your foot forward. It's a very advanced transition, and then you're in your lizard pose. So great sequence, and then she said from here there are tons of options you could even come into, like a half splits, come back. You can even cartwheel up into a reverse triangle pose. So really looking at who your target audience is to see what kind of transitions would suit them best for that. All right, so that was the only comment I saw come in for Transition Tuesday. Now I'll share some of the ones that I like to do, and I wrote them down because I wanted to make sure I covered them all with you. We'll first start with some poses you can transition from reverse warrior into. And so if we go into reverse warrior, at the beginning I said it's a very grounding, it's a very foundational pose. You're pressing your feet into the earth and you're reaching up and back to feel the opening in your side body. Now some options you have from here. Let's start with the challenging one, a balance pose. You could go from reverse warrior, pass through your warrior two, maybe into a half moon pose here, or you can even go into a standing split. So if you're here in reverse warrior, you can cartwheel your hands down, lift your back leg up into a standing split. You can do a curtsy and back up to your standing split. Like a really challenging practice, you could go from reverse warrior, cartwheel your hands down, lift up into handstand, and maybe come back into a reverse warrior. So if you have some strong, powerful yogis in your room, you could just hang out in reverse warrior and say to the other ones, if you're looking for a challenge, maybe cartwheel your hands down, take a handstand, we meet back in reverse warrior. So that could be something just to add a more challenging practice for those who are advanced in your class. All right, so we went over reverse warrior to some balancing poses. We talked about half moon, and we also talked about standing splits. You could also go from here, maybe just come up through your warrior two and come into a modified tree pose, what I call a shrub, where you just have your toes to the earth, a little shrub, or maybe you come into full tree pose. So that could also be an option for that. Or you could really make this really dynamic. So go from reverse warrior, come up, or let me try it again, come up into a modified dancing Shiva pose, and maybe they grab their leg and straighten. So you have some options to play around with to move from a reverse warrior to a balance pose. That's the main purpose of going through that, is you can go from a very grounding foundational pose into a balance pose. All right, and then we have side angle or triangle pose. So as Eve had mentioned, going from a reverse warrior into a side angle pose, Utthita Parsvakonasana. You can also go into a triangle pose. So if you're here and you wanted to give your students a break from so much activation on their leg, you could come up and pull down into triangle pose here. And then you could even do what you said, bring your hands down and move into a side plank pose. And you can also go into twist. So let me switch to the other side so I kind of balance out here. If you're in a reverse warrior, you could really make this dynamic and go down into a twist. So maybe cartwheel your hands down, right palm comes to the earth, left arm up, and you're in a twist. You could even back out of this the same way. So cartwheel up and open into a reverse warrior. So again, your top hand swings down, opposite hand comes up and around, and you're in a twist. And you could even take that into a prayer twist. It doesn't have to be that particular twist. You could go from here, maybe into a prayer twist. So you have some options with the arms, or you could even go from here into a T-twist with the arms, just like this. So those are some options to move from a reverse warrior into a twisting pose. And the last one I wanted to talk about from reverse warrior into other poses is to travel to the back of the mat. So a lot of times in our yoga practice, we kind of get stuck with students have to face one direction, and it's nice to spice things up and pivot to the back of the mat. So if you're here in reverse warrior, you could pivot to the back of the mat. So have your students look up at their fingertips, pivot around, watch their fingertips, and now you're facing this way. So you could even go into a pyramid pose from there, or you pivot around and maybe come into that same twist we showed earlier. Or you could go from reverse warrior, pivot around, step your foot forward, and maybe even come into a chair twist. So just some options to think about to make it a little different in your class, where you're here, and this is a great pose to spin around to the back of your mat because you're in this position, so it's kind of like a natural transition to want to move to the back of the mat, so it just makes it a little smoother. So let me know what you think. Maybe a thumbs up for those of you who are watching. Let me know what you're thinking so far of the transitions from reverse warrior into a different pose. And now we'll talk about what you can do from a pose to reverse warrior, and I have 4 of them to cover with you. The first one is lizard pose. So Eva talked about, going from side plank to lizard pose for one of her sequences. You could come from a lizard pose here, tuck your back toes under, lift your knee up, pivot your heel to the earth, reach up and open into a reverse warrior. So you can go from, a low pose up into a high pose. Again, it's really going to depend on your student base, if that is something that is accessible for them, that type of transition. All right, the next one is to go from a down dog right into reverse warrior. Right, so if we're here in down dog, a lot of times in sun salutation B, we step our foot forward, back into the earth, we rise up for our warrior A. Well, if you wanted to get a little different, spice things up, you could step your foot forward, back into the earth, cartwheel up and open right into a reverse warrior, and then maybe cartwheel down, move through your vinyasa, come back, and take the same thing on the opposite side. So it's a way to make your sun salutations feel different. I always do at least one sun A or sun B in my class, but I make them different. I make them feel different so that there's still like that foundational flow that is consistent for the students, but I'll spice it up with different poses so they're getting a different feeling. All right, low crescent twist to reverse warrior. So we talked about this a moment ago. If you're here in like a low crescent twist, you can even do this with the back knee down. Maybe you curl up and open into a reverse warrior. So reverse warrior doesn't always have to be done with both feet to the earth. You could have the back knee down and still move into a reverse warrior. So low crescent twist, cartwheel arms up and open, reverse warrior, that's what it would look like with the back knee down. Or you could go with the knee up and same thing, cartwheel up and around into your reverse warrior. That is humble warrior to reverse warrior. So my face is right, so I'm being pretty even. Humble warrior, I think I've also heard it called peaceful warrior. So if you're here in your warrior one legs and you fold down into humble warrior or peaceful warrior, as you come up, you could come up, release the arms, and reach up and back for a reverse warrior. So that could feel really good in your body, excuse me, or your student's body, to go from like a very contracting pose, where you're like closing off, and then it's like, oh yes, now I'm like totally expanding and opening after that pose of just like constricting off. So that's one of the ways I like to sequence, is if I'm having them in a pose that's like, squeezing. It's nice to do like a big opening pose right after that, even if it's just like to move through and then into something else. So that's what I got for you today.